Hey there, Professor Snart checking in as we continue moving through our online creative writing course. So we just move out of Unit 3, which is titled Language is Your Medium, but was fundamentally just looking at really one of the most basic building blocks for creative writing of any kind, no matter what the genre is, but analogic language or writing through analogy. So the basics of that is obviously simile, metaphor. Some people sort of found things that were bordering on allegory, which is really just a comparison that's extended for a longer period, like an entire song or really an entire book or set of books. But anyway, so simile metaphor was the common ground that we were looking for. And remember that I had you work with this formula that is obviously more mechanical than language really ever is in context. But it tried to get you to focus on comparison that took a abstract kind of big idea thing and compare it to or represent it through this much more mundane, everyday, tangible kind of thing. So the abstract is the concrete, or is like the concrete, you know. And so I think everyone who was able to do that formula did fine, but there were some people who found language that was certainly interesting or poetic in other kinds of ways, but didn't necessarily do the formula part, and so you found things that weren't actually comparative in the specific way that we were looking for. But we now move into Unit 4, and actually before I talk about Unit 4, let me just back up, and we'll take a quick look at the units themselves. So you'll notice that our first writing workshop, where you're producing your own full length, in this case short story, which is where we start, is coming up in Unit 5. So depending on how fast you work and how much time you have to devote to this sort of thing, you maybe want to start thinking about working on a short story that you'll be able to submit then for Unit 5, and even maybe clicking yourself into Unit 5 just to see what's on tap as we get closer to that workshop element for our class, even though we're actually just in Unit 4 here. Unit 4 is having us read about and look at some of the fundamental kind of theoretical aspects of short stories, largely having to do with how they're paced or organized, this notion of, you know, rising action and some moment and then a denouement or some falling action toward the end of it. And again, that's a prototypical or sort of classical model, and we can find many stories that conform to that, but probably just as many that don't necessarily. It's really good, though, to have a sense of the shape of your overall story or how you want to move a reader through something, regardless of the content. So you can actually have ideas about the short story before you sit down to write your short story, which is part of what we're trying to set up in this unit. The writing assignment itself is kind of like a short story, and it's also really fun. It's based on working with these trinkets or tchotchkes, right? And there's I think a pretty good example of that in the unit here. You're basically being asked to write a kind of backstory to this little trinket that gives it value. So it has some history that you're making up that makes it intriguing or, again, sort of attractive to someone who might otherwise not be so interested in it. And there's a great little audio clip from a show called Marketplace where the authors of this book talk about how they, as an experiment, they had writers, right, that they were hired, some famous, some not so famous, so names that you recognize, but also some that you wouldn't. They wrote backstories for these little tchotchkes, these little trinkets, and then the trinkets were sold on eBay accompanied by this backstory. And it wasn't a fraud. They were very forthright, like, this story is made up. It is not true. But it was amazing for the writers of the book, and I think for us as writers now, at how having an intriguing backstory increased the value of these tchotchkes, sometimes immeasurably, like significantly, they were more valuable. So it's sort of heartening to think that our work as a writer has this potentially this profound effect on the value of something. Not to get too, you know, financial or monetary about it, but the point is sort of bigger than that. Anyway, it's a fun writing assignment. Make sure you listen to the stuff and read the directions. You're not just writing any old thing. And really think about keeping the word limit here. You really want to be precise and concise and pick your details. So you can't just go on and on and on, right? People will get uninterested, not more interested. Try to be descriptive, but not descriptive of the thing that you're writing about. Like, it has very beautiful golden feet, or it comes with ski poles, or whatever the case might be. But be descriptive of its history, its background. And again, it sort of goes to our rules of creative writing. You want it to be interesting to somebody else, not because your story is about how the thing, and you're making this up, how the thing is necessarily interesting to you. So just because your grandma owned it and passed it on to your mom, who has then passed it on to you, that might be significant for you, but it's not necessarily going to add value to something for somebody else because it has, family value for you. Look at the examples here and you'll see how the best ones develop a backstory that gives the thing value because it has this, sort of exotic kind of history, and that's precisely what you're going for. Not this sort of mundane, this was passed through my family and now it's valuable. Well, to you maybe, but not really to anybody else. So a fun little writing exercise and very compact in terms of the word limit, but there's a lot of things that you're thinking about in terms of how to tell a compelling story, which is a great warm-up for ultimately the workshop unit where you're writing your own sort of full-length story that's coming up in Unit 5. So check the due dates just to see how things are going to break down as we move forward. Check the units to see where we're at, and then hopefully have some fun with Unit 4. It's always fun to see what tchotchkes people come up with, and of course to read the stories that they write about them. So if you have questions, be in touch, and I'll talk to everyone soon.